All right, it is officially 2 o'clock, and we are going to discuss legality with Kelly Wit Fowler and Christine Stenquist. Kelly Wit Fowler. Kelly believes that the free practice of religion is guaranteed by the Constitution of Utah, a state established by religious pioneers persecuted for their unique religious beliefs. As our pioneer ancestors sought communion at one-ment with gone through physical, others seek the same by other means. While grappling with existential dread of a cancer diagnosis, Kelly discovered the wisdom of entheogenic plant medicines. To her, they become a conduit to the divine and a sacrament to those who seek them. As an attorney working to further civil rights and criminal justice, Kelly is interested in the interplay of law and spiritual practices and the limits of religious belief. So thanks for being here, Kelly.
You're welcome.
Christine Stenquist is a mother of 4. She's also a brain tumor survivor and a chronic pain patient who became a cannabis advocate after seeking alternative treatment after years of failed pharmaceutical therapies. Christine's story and voice became the catalyst for legalization of medical cannabis in Utah by destigmatizing the drug use and reforming our outdated laws. She hopes to help her community see the benefits of plant-based treatments and the need for policy change to accommodate our growing curiosity and understanding. Sorry if I butchered any of that. I'm still learning a lot of these words. So thank you for being here, Kelly, and thank you for being here, Christine. I'll let you take it away.
Welcome.
Thanks for having us. So Kelly, do you want to start? How do you want us to do this? Gabe, you want us to?
Why don't one of you just decide? Christine, you can go ahead, start, and then Kelly, you can follow up. And then everybody who's watching, feel free, as you have questions, or if I don't catch something and you have a question, feel free to drop it in the question and answer area.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, Sarah and Steve, for having this event. I think this is really timely and needed for our entire community, and honestly, the next step in the discussion in plant-based medicine. So I was absolutely thrilled to have my own experience and my own journey with this, and to have Sarah and Steve be such dear friends as I was going through this experience. Like Gabe said, I come to this story because of the medical cannabis effort. And for some of you who don't know that story, I'll be very brief to touch on it because it leads quite nicely into my next transition with plant-based medicine with psilocybin. So 1996, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor, had a brain surgery that left me with some significant health issues, and 60% of the tumor still intact. For 16 years, I was bedridden and housebound and struggled with pharmaceutical drugs that failed me time and time again. And I was in a pain cycle in a particular moment. I was on fentanyl patch, heavy doses of opiates that weren't giving me any relief. And I was needing relief from my nausea. And cannabis seemed like a route that I could go on. Started using cannabis, did significant things, and started advocating to push policy here in our state so we could have brick and mortar, we could have real growing and real potential for patients to have access. What I discovered in my journey was that while cannabis relieved my symptoms, it lacked something that happened to me as a patient for all those years of suffering. You tend to lose a lot of your identity. You tend to lose a lot of who you are, and you become your condition. You become the pain, you become the symptoms, you become the diagnosis. I'm Christine, I'm a brain tumor patient. I'm Christine, I have, trigeminal neuralgia. We become these labels, and a disconnect started happening for me during that process. Depression plays such a major role in long suffering. And with chronic pain patients, or just chronic illness, you have that goes on. And so there was definitely a spiritual death that was happening to me all those years being bedridden and isolated. The only interactions I had were my immediate family. And it really plagued on my depression and a lot of issues that I didn't address with the cannabis. Cannabis wasn't helping heal me. it was treating symptoms. And so I kept searching for more, and I wasn't finding answers. I didn't know where else to look. Along the path and the journey, there are cannabis advocates who, knew much more about the psychedelic world than I was even aware of. I just discovered cannabis and was unfamiliar with what else had been kind of restricted from us as a society. And in my journey, psilocybin was introduced to me, and I wasn't somebody who was real gung ho about it, but I tried it and found no real great relief. I was taking doses and I wasn't having any significant relief. Still having problems with pain. It led me to a very, very dark night for me. Depression had taken a hold of me pretty hard. I was in the middle of a pain cycle that had been unrelenting. I suffer from one of my labels, hemicrania continuum, which is a type of migraine, but I also have a migraine that causes stroke-like symptoms to appear. So I was having these repeatedly that would happen, and I'd get in these very bad pain cycles. Anyway, the depression led to a night where suicide was contemplated. It wasn't something that I had a plan in place, but I definitely needed somebody to talk to. And I had a friend reach out to me. He stayed with me on the phone until another friend in the morning, a physician friend of mine who was helping me treat my pain, sent me to a ketamine clinic, because ketamine was known to help this particular migraine that I suffered from. It was something he had suggested a couple of weeks prior. And so I thought this might be an option for me. I was needing help with treating the depression, but it also could help with the thing that was causing my depression, this chronic pain that I could not stop thinking about. Went into the clinic and started the treatment. And it was a very unusual experience. I had a definite disconnect from my body. And I went in with no intentions. I didn't know what to expect. And it was a very clinical type setting, a very comfortable atmosphere. And during that dissociative process, I was able to start really reflecting on myself and who I was, and the biggest thing was, who was I? I had gone from being a chronic pain patient, a mom who was raising children at home, then all of a sudden a very public advocate for something quite controversial, bumping up against taking on the LDS Church, taking on the legislative body. There was a lot of trauma involved with being very public. But who was Christine? I didn't know who I was anymore. I was a persona for a cause. I was a patient. I was a mom. But in that ketamine treatment, I was able to dissociate from myself. And like you guys were talking in the earlier segment, I really had an ego death. And I got to strip away all the labels that had been put on me by my existence. From the moment I was born, I was a daughter, I was a sister, I was all these labels that sort of got put on me as I transitioned through life, got away from me. I was distant from it. And I got to strip down to who I was and what I felt and what I thought. And it was a very profound experience for me. I came out of it, and I remember calling Steve and said, that was the most amazing thing. I don't know, I have to finish the rest of these treatments, but there might be something here. He says, well, there might be something with psilocybin too. There might be, finish your journey and let's talk a little more. And I did. I went through the rest of the treatments. In one of those treatments, I did have what was described as a bad trip. It was the legislative session, and I got a phone call from a legislator asking me questions about a bill that was about to be in, literally before I walked into the clinic to have my treatment. Went into that treatment, I was like, I'm going to be fine. I'm not there. I'm not in that space. I'm not part of that chaos. Went into the treatment, and it was a bad trip, defined as a bad trip. But I came out of it telling the nurse, like, I'm so glad this happened. I needed that to happen. This whole thing had to happen just like this so I could heal. And that's what I kind of felt like. I could really unlock some of that garbage and heal. Going through that experience, it piggybacked right back to where cannabis was for me. I needed to figure out how could people get legal access, because I knew there was more to this than just ketamine. It started the nosedive, just like cannabis did. I wanted to learn more about what was going on with psychedelics. It led me to maps. It led me to other conversations. I know the earlier presenter, Mindy Vincent, the journey and the conversations, you guys saw what an incredible speaker she is. The journey and the experience she has had, where she was one of the advocates that taught me. I felt like we needed to push this conversation a little forward. Led me to using psilocybin finally, and I actually had a profound experience. I've been able to unlock a creative side in me. I've started painting, and it's been an overwhelming experience. I didn't know I had that talent in there, because I didn't know me. I didn't know who I was in my world and in my existence on this planet. And going through this process this year, while 2020 may have been hell for a lot of us, it has been spiritually profound for me. I have tapped into something that is hard to describe. It is a feeling of oneness. And I think everyone should have access to that. And so I'm trying to take the talents that I have gained through the cannabis movement and channel it to enlighten the rest of our community, how we can have these experiences. We are dutifully righted to have these experiences, and how we can legally go about doing that. So that's what I'm bringing to the table.
Thank you, Christine. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Truly. Okay, so let me get my glasses back on here. I had a similar path to psychedelic substances as Christine did, starting primarily with ketamine for depression, same sort of situation, after having gone through cancer. And, but as far as my biggest fear, and one of the problems I had even when I was doing ketamine, which was at a clinic with a doctor overseeing everything, was I had read Michael Pollan's book about how to change your mind. I would highly recommend anybody interested in these things to do that. And I knew the importance of set and setting. And in fact, the doctor actually spoke about set and setting to a certain degree before we engaged in anything. And of course, at that time, I was actively a criminal defense attorney and also doing a couple of cases involving civil rights litigation. And so I'm thinking to myself, one of my first trips involved kind of going down this rabbit hole of, is this legal? What if I'm caught, and all this sort of thing. So when Steve approached me about being involved in this and being a panelist, talking about the legalities of it, I kind of had to laugh to myself, because one of my very first experiences on these substances was very negative, because I was worried about that, even though I was in a doctor's setting. But that's just insight into, sometimes my anxieties get the better of me. So with that in mind, I wanted to make note that I find it very appropriate that today is, excuse me, World Mental Health Day. I think that, one of the things that these psychedelics promise us is an actual therapy that can get us where we haven't been before when it comes to mental health treatment. Excuse me. I kind of feel, in my own family, I have a son who's been hospitalized multiple times for mental health issues for extended periods of time. And I feel like everything until I discovered psychedelics really felt like bloodletting and leeches. And that we really weren't, they're doing what they can with the dialectical behavioral therapies and the cognitive behavioral therapies. And I do believe that they have ultimate importance. You can't just do one without the other. I think they need to be joint therapies, but the psychedelics just transform that experience. I was watching a video the other day, it was on Netflix, where a guy described he was going through PTSD after being in Iraq. And he described therapy using psilocybin through a MAPS study he was involved in as you're going through therapy, but you're in a tub full of puppies and you're surrounded by all of the people you know that love and care about you, and they're all loving on you at the same time. And the puppies are in there, and you can talk about these horrible things that happen to you without judgment, without assessment. Just talk and just be and approach these things without judgment. And to me, that just seemed profound, because every time that I tried to engage in therapy, I couldn't stop judging myself, you know, for things. And to me, that just seemed profound. So anyway, I liked what one of the prior presenters said about psychedelics aren't illegal because they're dangerous. They're dangerous because they're illegal.
Agreed.
That's a perfect segue into what I wanted to talk about today. But I need to first give a caveat here, because I am an attorney. I'm not your attorney. I'm not representing the Divine Assembly or Psychedelics in the Beehive or providing legal advice in any way in this presentation. Nothing that I'm saying should be taken as legal advice. In fact, I don't actually practice criminal law anymore. So I wouldn't be able to help you personally, even if you did get into a situation, though you can still reach out through Steve or through the Divine Assembly. Maybe they'll even start putting a list together of attorneys, but I'm certainly still connected in that world and can give referrals if people need be. I'm also not advocating for any illegal activity. If anything, I'd say my comments might be best described as proselytizing, since I believe in the divinity of these plants. And as the Divine Assembly teaches, they are a sacrament. In fact, I'd say they almost go as far as being a god to me. And we'll understand maybe why that's important here in a minute. Again, I would really encourage you to read Michael Pollan's book to get a background and understanding of why we are where we are right now with these substances having been scheduled and largely illegal. So the two areas I'm going to look at right now, and I'm going to be looking at my notes a bit, so I apologize if I'm not looking directly at the screen to you guys, because it is a little disconcerting that I'm only looking at Gabe. Hey, Gabe. But I know you guys are out there. So I want to look at two things. Number one is the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA. And the other is what happens if law enforcement does insert themselves into your religious practice. In other words, what happens if you get busted? What should you do? What are some of your options? So first of all, RFRA. So despite recent Supreme Court cases protecting religious use of plant medicines, federal courts still tend to look at the use of scheduled substances with suspicion. The book that I referenced, Michael Pollan's book, goes into how these substances became to be banned. But the fact is that some of these early psychedelic churches were part of the problem. They were cavalier, they were reckless in their treatment and use of these medicines, and their acts are still coloring governmental views of these substances today. One of the earliest churches was actually founded by Timothy Leary. I think we probably all know who he is, or quick Google search and you will. He was kind of a notorious character. He founded a church called the League of Spiritual Discovery, LSD, which was based on that use. It was basically a free-for-all for psychedelic experimentation by people who really weren't given preparation or supervision, and it invited a lot of negative attention that's still affecting us today. So first of all, we all have a responsibility when we're using these substances to honor what they are and treat them with the respect they deserve so that we can preserve our access to them, all right? So first of all, RFRA. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution includes what's largely considered an establishment clause. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Seems clear enough, but as with anything in legal circles, it's actually far more complex. Some of you may have heard of the Native American exception to the Controlled Substances Act for their traditional use of peyote. That practice is allowed through the Religious Restoration and Freedom Act, which was signed into law in 1993. The act was passed in response to a Supreme Court case, Employment Division v. Smith, where Oregon attempted to deny unemployment benefits to 2 Native American men who were fired after testing positive for mescaline, which they used during their religious practice. So unfortunately, the decision didn't go their way. Afterwards, Congress disagreed with the outcome and decided to pass RFRA in response. It was to further unburden religion or the practice of religion from any harsh oversight from the state. Since Smith, the Supreme Court of the United States has applied RFRA in cases of religious use of ayahuasca. There's a Gonzalez case that involved a Brazilian church using a substance that they called Santo Daime. It upheld the protections for those whose religious practices included these plant medicines. Still, regardless of those provisions, you have to remember that in the law, every case is dealt with by the judge who's in front of it. Every case is brought by the prosecutor who decides to take it up. So regardless of the Supreme Court coming down very strongly saying that governments will have to apply a strict analysis of whether or not the law is overly burdensome, courts are still overly burdening it. The way that they do that is they engage in constitutionally impermissible analyses of the legitimacy of the religion that an adherent claims to follow. So they look at the religion itself and say, is this a viable thing? Does it have all the tenets of a religion? The Supreme Court has said clearly that that is not okay. But what the courts have said is the analysis they must undertake is whether or not the adherent is sincerely devoted to the religion. In other words, do they have a sincerely held belief? That becomes the standard. So if you're charged with something, they may try to argue that it's not a real religion. Let's say that you joined the Divine Assembly or any other religion that has plant sacraments as part of it. They may try to say that that religion is not valid. That claim should be shot down immediately. The problem is it might take a lot of time and money to get to that point. But that's not the analysis that they're supposed to be taking. And actually in the 10th Circuit and in Utah cases, they tend to be okay with that. We have progressive judges. Judge Shelby, who was part of the Kitchen decision in the LGBT community in legalizing gay marriage. We do have some progressive judges on the federal bench here, so we get a little bit better treatment that way, I'd say, than some other states. But regardless, it is still happening. So when they are looking into the sincerity of a person's beliefs, what are they looking at? Well, let's kind of pause for a second here because to further complicate issues for us adherents, RFRA actually hasn't been applied to state law, to the states. It isn't something states are required to follow. A lot of them have incorporated similar type protections, but not all of them. So it kind of depends on where you are. And again, it comes down to the prosecutor or the government actor that you're up against. However, in Utah, a case, Utah v. Mooney, held that if the state is going to burden religion, its desire to do so would again, just like these other cases under RFRA nationally, be subject to a strict scrutiny analysis, meaning that the government would have to prove it had a very compelling interest in order to burden your practice of religion using these plants. We have another really unique situation to Utah, which I think was kind of referenced a little bit in my little bio thing, which is that Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution, the state constitution, mirrors the federal one. It says the state shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Okay, great. But we also have Article 3, which goes further to say perfect toleration of religious sentiment is guaranteed. No inhabitant of this state shall ever be molested in person or property on account of his or her mode of religious worship. Again, it seems kind of like a slam dunk, but it isn't. So what do we do with all this information? We've got state protections, we've got federal protections. Our state protections are actually stronger than the federal protections. So what do we, as someone who just wants to reach God through these plants, do? First of all, you need to be aware that there isn't any case, including Mooney, that affirmatively established that the RFRA type peyote protections are available to you in Utah without fail. That doesn't mean that you couldn't go forward and win. What it means is there's no prior restraint on a law enforcement officer arresting you. So you still could get arrested even in light of these cases. So there's still a risk in the religious use of these substances. The Brazilian church case with ayahuasca really applied specifically to those churches and did not offer a safe harbor outside them. Secondly, courts are very interested in the safety of these substances. A lot of the decisions coming down focus on that. They do a two-part analysis. Are these things safe enough that we can usurp the Controlled Substances Act and allow them to be used under the religious freedoms exceptions? So they're going to keep watching what's happening in the communities with these substances. So that becomes even more important, that those of us who are using them make sure that they remain safe and we're doing it in a safe way. Third, probably the most important part, religious language and devotion must be shown. I know myself, I saw Sarah's comment earlier that she considers herself an atheist. When I left the LDS church 10, 12 years ago, I think it's been, I felt the same, that until actually I had experiences with psychedelics, I continued to feel the same until about last year. And so anything that smacks of actual religious practice, I was very, it made me shudder. I didn't want to have anything to do with any of that, because that was just I understand everyone has their own path, but my path was swung the pendulum the other way after leaving the church. So it's kind of hard to think to yourself sometimes, okay, this is my substitute religion, because why should I have to do that? Why should I have to follow these kinds of practices? Well, from what I can see of the law right now, these need to be, the use of the plant in a religious setting needs to be part of your sincerely held religious practice in order to be protected by the law in its current state, I should say. It is evolving all of the time. And in fact, I reached out to some of my friends in the criminal law community to see if there's any cases being teed up right now. And right now in Utah, there aren't any. So someone asked earlier, how often are these things criminalized? Maybe that helps to answer the question a little bit. Is I don't think they're out knocking on doors when they're, someone's having an ayahuasca circle, as long as you don't have, people running down the streets out of their minds. I think that would be a problem. So in any event, the religious exemption really only offers protection if there is a showing of great religiosity. So as much as that might bother people, that is the case. There is some promise in the holdings in those churches or in those cases that they could apply to other ayahuasca churches or other churches that use different substances. And theogenic, that just means basically a God substance is what that word is, Gabe, earlier. And
thank you. Appreciate it.
And there is some hope that they can be applied to others. That's why I say I'd asked if there's any cases that are in the queue, kind of looking to have them be applied to others. So anyway, so where does that get us? Well, an organization like the Divine Assembly with its mushroom sacrament is a safer step towards sincere worship. because you're in a group of like-minded peoples. It is an organized, air quotes, organized religion, whose structure, as the Urquharts put it, is horizontal, which I really love that idea. I like the fact that there's not a hierarchy, and there certainly is a precedent for that type of a religious structure. I mean, you look at Islam, they don't have a pope. You know, there isn't a top-down kind of a structure within some of the world's great religions. So it's not like the Divine Assembly would be the first. Part of the other reason why psilocybin is a promising one is, as has been discussed by others, there's hardly any, I don't think there are any reported, deaths or safety issues with psilocybin. Excuse me. Unfortunately, I've had this allergies and cold the last couple of days. Excuse me. Okay, so since the government is allowed to probe our sincere beliefs, you might want to think about what this means to you and how sincere you are in your practice using them, however that is defined by you. I know, if it is your sacrament to the way that it is my sacrament, my practice has been to treat it with respect and honor and dignity, and show that it is my sincerely held belief. It is my connection to the divine. It's the only thing, despite a lifetime of church attendance, including being married in the LDS temple, that I've ever felt that connection to deity. I honor the power that it has, and I pay ultimate attention to the set and setting in which my practice takes place. The concept of ego death, as has been discussed, can be experienced with these substances. And that same concept is in traditional religious texts as well. The concepts of nothingness or lowliness before God. So, number one, if you want to be under the umbrella of the possible protections offered by religious practice and religious use, then treat it as such. Establish that within your home and within your heart. And again, however that looks to you. Because if you do get caught, this is moving on to arm number 2 here. If you do get caught, establishing that you had it already in your life beforehand, that this was something that you are out about, to whatever degree you're comfortable, but at least that you could have somebody that could come in and say, oh yeah, they went all new agey and joined this church and they found God, like someone needs to know this that could possibly come in and, be a character witness or something like that, if you are caught. It is possible that you could be arrested or cited for your use of these things and for your possession of them. And by the way, possession does not only include, distribution does not only include selling, it's giving. You can be, charged with distribution. If you give, if you share, you can still be charged with distribution. So those are still possibilities under the law as it exists. And it really comes down to where you live, the jurisdiction in Utah. Some are more liberal than others. Some you might get cited, but the prosecutor's screening it. I would think Sim Gill's office would be a little bit more open to just letting them go with some diversion agreement or something like that than, say, for example, the prosecutors down in, Washington County and St. George. Those guys are pretty conservative. So, number one, establish ahead of time. This is what I do for myself. Establish ahead of time that this is my path to divinity. In fact, these plants are my divinity, and have people who know that. If you are pulled over or they come to your house, all the usual things that an attorney would tell you apply. Do not ever consent to a search. Do not leave things that are in plain view in your home or in your vehicle or on your person that an officer can see, because that's an exception to a warrant. If they can see them in plain view, then they can confiscate and go after them. Don't invite officers into your house without a warrant. You don't need to be a jerk about it. You don't need to create a problem, but just don't consent. Again, they may still search your car. They may still come into your house. But if you have consented, we as attorneys have zero we can argue. If you haven't, then we can argue that they didn't have a warrant. There weren't exigent circumstances to justify them coming in without one, you know, those types of issues. So they might still come in, but at least we'd have something to work with. Now, normally when I used to talk to my my clients, my criminal defense clients, I would remind them, you never talk to police. You always hear attorneys saying that, never talk to the cops. I would say in this circumstance, there might be one exception. Law enforcement isn't going to get too deep with you into your use of psychedelics or your religious practice or anything like that. If they find it, they'll probably just confiscate it and arrest or cite you and let the prosecuting attorney follow up. However, if you've already, again, this is my practice, this is what I talk to my kids about, because I've actually have done several journeys with my adult daughter who's 27, and they've been amazing experiences. But so this is the conversation that I have with her. The exception to talking to police officers, if you are arrested, is if they've already found whatever you might have had, you're already in their clutches, they're citing you, you've been arrested. Make it a point that it's either on their body cam video or, you know, that have a conversation with them about the fact that you are a religious adherent, that these are your sacraments, that they are taking away your sacrament from you. Mention the religious use in some way. The cases that I have been reading they bring that into play, where a person has said from the get-go, this is my religious sacrament, I'm an adherent of this church. That has more power than if they come in later with their attorney a month down the road and mention it sometime through, you know, at some other point in the proceeding. So if you're already nabbed, that might be something to keep in mind, that establish from the get-go that you're a religious adherent and this is your sacrament. And so again, that's my personal practice. So, I mean, I can go a lot more into that, but let me just quickly, before summing up, state that there are civil repercussions, not just criminal, that people might need to think about. If you have an ornery ex and they find out through Facebook or something else that you are going on these psychedelic trips, they might use that against you to try to say that you're an unfit parent, and they might be successful in that. Licensing can become an issue. CDL licenses versus regular driver's licenses can be an issue. There are some far-reaching effects there that can be very, very devastating. So, you know, the number one thing to me is just, it's good to be aware of these things, but don't dwell on these things. If you pay attention to what everybody has talked about here, create the right setting, be in the right mindset, honor what these things are and the power that they have. You are part of a long tradition of the use of these plants to encounter the divine, and you have a right to. We just happen to live in a society that doesn't recognize that right, but in some places they do. Iboga is legal, ayahuasca is legal in south of the border, Iboga is legal in Canada. Some of these other substances, to Trevor, I've noticed a lot of his questions and comments are about, you know, those aspects. How do we know if they're criminal? Aren't they evil? You know, things like this. go to Colorado if you want to give it a shot and see what it's like, because Trevor hasn't used them before. Sorry, I'm not picking on you, Trevor. I'm just using you as an example here. But if you haven't used them before, I agree it would be kind of hard to know, well, how do I know if this is even a sacrament to me? How do I know if I'm going to honor this thing, and love this substance if I've never tried it? There are ways to do that that don't have any or very little risk, I should say, because they're not actually legal, they're decriminalized. There's a slight difference. Right. But go somewhere where, like, like Colorado or Oregon, where they can be used and you don't have to be paranoid about that. So anyway, let's see, I have been looking at my notes and not looking at questions or anything. So
got some questions rolling in.
Okay.
I don't want to interrupt you when you're.
No, I'm ready. That's, I don't have a big pum ending. That's.
I just want to kind of do a little sweep up because,
Yes.
we got to move towards, like, what do we do now?
Yeah.
That is one of the questions. So that's perfect. Trevor asks.
So what now?
Yep. What now?
So, and this is again why I'm kind of here in this space, is to, a lot of people were like, well, what happens with cannabis? What now? I started a group. I said, started talking, having conversations, started going up to the legislators and saying, we need to have this discussion. Same thing that we did with the cannabis movement, we need to do with psilocybin. We do have several states well, there's only 2 right now, but we do have a few spots in the country that are moving towards legalization and having that conversation. So what's happening right now is a gathering, a grouping, and an organizing of people. Right now you have the Defiant Assembly trying to create community. And so that's the whole purpose of this, is we want to establish there is a community, a need, a desire to create a safe space. We need to decriminalize the use of this substance, so that if there are people who are having bad trips, it's not illegal for them to call in others for help. We just need to take that negative component out of it. So the first step right now is having a conversation and gathering together and organizing. And that's from my perspective as an advocate, pushing for substance to be decriminalized and destigmatized.
Thanks. So I think that answers Tara's first question, which is how can we help support these changes? And what I'm hearing from you, Christine, and kind of bouncing off of Kelly, is creating this community is part of that process.
Yes,
totally.
I was already practicing some, and it's hard for me to call them religious tenets, because they were spiritual tenets. I'm a bit like Trevor and a few others who are commenting that I'm left the LDS church years ago, and I'm not looking for that one certain entity that is divine. I really am in my journey currently, and we've heard speakers throughout this say that we're each on our own journey. For me, it was inward. It's trying to discover who I am and what I am, and not the chatter that seems to be around me in the world. If I can find inner peace, I think I can discover what this outer piece is all about. And so for me, psilocybin is not the only psychedelic I've used this year. I have tried DMT, I have tried LSD, all of these in a very, very spiritual intent. And set and setting was something that Kelly discussed. It's something that I have really encouraged those who are just journeying into cannabis, the same thing. Set and setting is very important. Your intention on how you use these substances, these sacraments, is very much about how you're going to have your experience. If you go in like partying up and you're going to do some, Molly, and you're just going to make out with everybody, I mean, that's the experience you're going to have. If you go in using the sacrament, a lot of times I will take sacrament before I start a painting session. And I will paint for 7-8 hours and just be lost in that moment with myself, enjoying that adventure. And that is my sacrament. There's use and abuse with everything. And I think with your intent is to be spiritual and find your oneness and your wholeness with this, you're going to find that in the community and in others.
Thanks. Kelly, there's an interesting legal question in here, and it just disappeared. I don't know where it went. It was from David, and it says, could a spouse not part of the Divine Assembly be arrested or prosecuted simply by knowing the Divine Assembly member has and uses the sacrament?
Yeah, actually, I just typed a little quick answer while Christine was talking in case we ran out of time. But so that moved over to the answered column. That's why it disappeared on you. Sorry.
Okay.
So my answer was, we still don't prosecute thought crimes in this country, thankfully, yet. I mean, you never know. It seems like we're facing some fascist regimes happening here. So I don't know where we're headed, but right now, I do not believe that a spouse can be prosecuted for knowing anything. Number one, you've got spousal protections, so they can't be forced to testify you about anything. You know, I guess the short answer is there are multiple layers of protection for a spouse, and no, they could not be arrested or prosecuted for knowing that you've used something.
Thanks. Benjamin Bombard asks, what does it take to belong to a church under the law, or is religious practice the mere compelling consideration?
Well, I guess my answer to that would be, let me pull it back up so I can read again.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I'll go to, is it in answered now? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it'll be at the very bottom.
So number one, you don't have to belong to a church, but from the cases I've read, the sincerely held belief is much more provable if you do belong to a church. I mean, I don't know if you're going to invite somebody into your house and show them all of your altars and statues and the things you find important. I mean, I didn't go into any of my 4 surgeries related to my cancer without my little smoky quartz crystal with me. Is that a talisman of my religious practice? I guess it is. I mean, it kind of is. I didn't really view it that way, but yeah, it kind of is. So to belong to a church under the law is to affiliate with them. If you go to the Divine Assembly's website, they kind of have a Q&A that answers some of those questions. They don't, again, it's a horizontal organization. Steve describes it really well, or Sarah, actually, I'm not sure which of those guys worked on those tenets, but they're fantastic. And I would recommend everybody go and read them. That might kind of answer your question right there. I don't know which would be more compelling. Probably through the eyes of a former prosecutor, the actual involvement in the religion would be better, like as in being a member of something. I know in the custody cases I looked at with Native American law and tribal law, membership mattered. So I would say the default would be membership mattered. You're going to have a harder time proving that your religious practice is truly under the umbrella of religion if you're not in an actual organized group.
Thanks. Marcy Collette asks, as a member of the Divine Assembly, I'm worried about other members using our religion to perhaps practice with the sacrament in a non-safe and insincere way. What's your advice to the Divine Assembly managing members? Should the Divine Assembly revoke membership of those practicing unsafely or insincerely? Well,
I would respond. I mean, number one, that might be something more for Sarah and Steve, but my response would just be, there's a long history of religions expelling people for lack of adherence to their tenets. And I know that on their site, it is stressed repeatedly that safety is paramount, that you report to authorities if there's any kind of sexual assault or anything, and that you should never fear calling authorities if things are going south. So it's not like they're trying to run under the radar. They're trying to create a structure and a format that's protective of people. So I would imagine, yes, if somebody is in there that is causing problems and not adhering to the tenets, that there may be some process. I don't know if they've thought that out or if they have a plan for that, but I know that it's a clearly established thing in pretty much every other religion that you can be booted out if you're a bad guy or girl.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our session. There is a few more questions out there. Kelly, it looks like you're very well versed in answering those. So if you don't mind getting to those during the break.
Yeah.
Thank you for your legal expertise. This has been eye-opening for me. And Christine, thank you so much for your heartfelt story and all of your expertise as well.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed
Thank
this
you.
time with you both.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Kelly. It was
Yeah,
good.
thanks, Christine. Thanks for letting us be a part of this.
Yes, thanks, Sarah and Steve. Thanks, Divine Assembly.